Hi, everybody. I first and foremost want to thank you for taking time to view my presentation for our cognition class. I hope you enjoy what I have brought to the course. In this course, I have focused my term paper and this presentation on parental brain changes. Now, the exploration into changes regarding women began sometime within the late 1960s. So there is quite a bit of extensive research in mothers and as they transition and how they encounter episodes of parenthood, specifically with their role as primary caregiver, the hormone experiences that occur, brain changes, relationship to the mother-infant bond and attachment. And there's definitely more research that shows that mothers are more emotionally responsive to their infants. However, there has been very little to no research regarding fathers as they transition into fatherhood and in their role as parenting. As far as we know, fathers are typically secondary caregivers. They are known to be the primary breadwinners, and they are less emotionally responsive and less involved with caregiving of an infant. So let's jump into parental caregiving and what it is today. Current research regarding Western society dynamics have revealed that mothers and fathers now cooperatively care for the home because most of them are both employed, therefore they share child rearing responsibilities. In fact, in the United States alone, caregiving fathers has tripled within the last 50 years. And a lot of fathers have actually stated that they identify the role as fatherhood as being part of their core identity. So, how does one transition into parenthood? This is where we start discussing parental cognition and the adaptations that take place. So, research must address how do parents acquire the cognitive skills necessary to care for an infant? What are the cognitive skills required to care for an infant? And are these cognitive skills unique to women? Are the cognitive skills unique to men? And are these cognitive skills required of parenting limited to biological parents of an infant? Now, so researchers have identified parental cognition to be some of the following, but is not limited to this. There is attention, vigilance, planning, decision-making, biobehavioral synchrony. And the brain must acquire operative collaborations of neural networking processes, behavioral responses, emotional control, and additional cognitive processes in order to successfully retain the appropriate level of parental cognition. So, my question is, do cognitive functionality changes occur as a parent versus not being a parent? So to do this, I have examined parenting behaviors in non-human mammals and in human mammals. I've explored various hormonal changes and various neural network changes identified by researchers, and all of which serve as components for successful parental adaptation and cognition. So jumping into research regarding non-human mammals in parenting, researchers here explored neural circuitry, hormones, neuromodulators regarded in parenting behaviors that are involved in cognition and mood in non-human mammalian species, specifically related to rodents and apes. So some of the behaviors that we see in female rodents involve cleaning of the pups, building nests, nursing, pup retrieval. This is something that kind of takes place when the infant or pup infant tries to run out of the nest, so the mother quickly brings them back in. And then there's the nursing posture over the pup, which is a defensive mechanism where they place themselves over them, which is a response to protect them and also linked to heightened aggression towards intruders. Now, when we look at female primates, we also see nursing, carrying of the infant. They also groom their young, and they are also protective of their infant and keep them from danger. Now, interestingly, it has been found that male species in rodents and primates display the exact same behaviors as maternal caregivers, with the exception of nursing, of course. So when scientists in this article looked at activation in specific brain regions, they found that the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and the olfactory bulb were specifically activated due to increased levels of glucocorticoids, such as estrogen, androgen, and vasopressin. So, when we look at parental experiences and how they influence brain regions, researchers in this article say they are directly associated with parenting. And the effects associated with specific areas of parental cognition that are affected include learning, working memory, anxiety regulation, emotion, and mood regulation, which is definitely significant when you think about caring for a young. Additionally, non-human mammals and human parenting behaviors are similar in the prefrontal cortex, specifically with certain activation levels. And researchers of this article state that there is an indirect influence of parenting behaviors which attribute to changes in the prefrontal cortex activation. And this can be a result of fluctuation of hormones that we mentioned, estrogen, vasopressin, parenting experiences and exposure, their living environment. And it was specifically noted that in non-human mammals, there was dendritic spine density and neural growth of significant level in the prefrontal cortex. Researchers ultimately determined that the enriching aspect of parenting alone may be the most important factor for driving changes that occur in the brain. So now as we look to human maternal parenting, we examined into research conducted by Kim, who specifically focused her changes on the human mother's brain using structural and functional imaging during pregnancy and postpartum. So what Kim found was that there was activation in the reward maternal motivation network of the brain, activated by hormones such as dopamine, oxytocin, when it was specifically related to stimuli that was their own infant. Additionally, there was an increased level of neural activity in the social processing network, and activation in this network is associated with empathy, self-monitoring, and self-reflection. And this is a significant finding because this helps us interpret infant emotions, social cues, and develop appropriate responses to those cues. Kim also found increased activity in emotional regulation networks, and activation here assists the mother to develop the appropriate and effective emotional response and develop the appropriate level of emotional regulation as she herself adjusts to the stressors that are involved to infant cues and care, such as crying, fussiness, and whining. So Kim also addressed the psychological adaptations that take place, which are very important and do affect our daily life. So most of these psychological adaptations begin to occur during pregnancy and continue postpartum, which basically just means after the infant has been born. There is hypervigilance to threats, which is considered an adaptive biological trait, just as we saw in the research presented in non-human mammals. Mothers are more sensitive to infant cues. They are more sensitive to their cries, their smell, and movement. There's also stronger feelings of attachment there. And in these mothers, we see increased vocalization, facial expressions, and mother-infant gaze during their social interaction, or as they call play. Brings us next to human paternal parenting. And this is where we're going to go ahead and focus on the adaptive cognitive skills that are required or that manifest and present in fathers when they become parents. So in research by Philbin, Braun, and Champagne, I hope it's Champagne because that's what I said, they actually found that paternal care was very similar and reflects that of maternal care. There was the same type of hormone activation and the same neural regions were activated as well. So fathers were very warm, they reciprocated emotions, and they nurtured their infants in the same way as mothers. There was a significant difference as they found that fathers engaged in more physical acts of play than mothers did. And by doing so, there was an increase of levels in oxytocin and vasopressin in fathers. And additionally, the interactions that fathers have with their children and infants specifically are selected to attention and include more physical and mental exploration. For example, fathers spend more time with their children doing imaginatory things indoors like building forts, and they go outside and explore more and build things and just do things that are stereotypically male things, but it's actually been found that doing these things also increase levels of oxytocin, prolactin, and vasopressin in the brains of fathers. So what was found here is that there are sex-specific networks which control parenting-related sequencing of representations in neural networks of an infant that instill high reward values for fathers. And this has been referred to as the Global Human Caregiving Network. This network supports parental behavior and allows moment-to-moment and long-term parental planning, which is very important. And so continuing, caregiving fathers have demonstrated higher levels of activation in all regions of the human caregiving network in response to their infant. Now, to give you a little background, this area is very interesting because it includes so many parts of the brain. Specifically, there is activation and volume increase in gray matter in the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and subcortical dopamine reward circuits. If you look in this image here, you can actually see the areas in the father's brain that are more activated. Now, additional research has been presented that identifies two caregiving networks in mothers and fathers. And one is the motivational emotional limbic network, which includes brain regions such as the amygdala, anterior cingulate cortex, nucleus accumbens, and then there is the social attention network, which is associated with social cognition and empathy. And regions in this network include the medial prefrontal cortex, the superior temporal gyrus, the insula, inferior parietal lobe, and inferior frontal gyrus. So these neural networks are very, very important. Enhanced limbic motivational activity in mothers has been connected to maternal caregiving. Enhanced social cognitive activity has been associated with paternal caregiving. Compromised a critical network of mentalization, action representation, stimulation, mirroring, attention, and high-order cognitive abilities. And in psychological and cognitive sciences, activation in these networks has been associated with empathy, social cognition, and actually the theory of mind. So research in these two key parental networks and parenting behaviors has focused on affectionate touch, which involves things like infant caress, kissing an infant, and responding to their movements. And then there is infant synchrony, which is parental gaze, which is eye-to-eye contact, parent vocalization, also referred to as infant-directed speech or motheress, and then parent affect. So when researchers approached this specific area of research, they were focused on two particular hormones and their role in their contribution to this type of behaviors. One was oxytocin, the other was testosterone. So over a 6-month period after becoming new parents, levels of oxytocin and testosterone were monitored. And what was found is that levels of oxytocin was stable in mothers and fathers throughout the entire 6-month period. However, they found that fathers had higher levels of testosterone while mothers had lower levels of testosterone. And this was in agreement with the previous theory of steroid peptide social bonds, which basically states that high levels of oxytocin mixed or combined with low levels of testosterone enhance nurturing and intimacy. And this was significant because this research study actually found that fathers were less likely to engage with the infant. Therefore, their research indicated that mothers had exhibited greater measures of parent-infant synchrony and bonding and affectionate touch when compared to fathers. Which brings us to biobehavioral synchrony. And biobehavioral synchrony is a very, very interesting aspect of behavior, which I myself had never even heard of, but have found to actually kind of fall in love with, actually. There's no really other way to say it. So biobehavioral synchrony is something that has occurred when a mother or a father automatically becomes in tune with their infant. So Abram and Fieldman measured biobehavioral synchrony via fMRI of auditory and visual responses of infant stimuli from parents' own infant and the same parents when they were exposed to non-familiar infants. And participants here were primary caregiving heterosexual mothers, secondary caregiving heterosexual fathers, and primary caregiving homosexual fathers. And here we can look at a quick scale which represents the levels of parent and infant synchrony scores. Mothers are indicated by pink, and then we see bright green for fathers and dark green for same couple fathers. Now, what was found here is two very, very important differences in caregiving statuses, and of which we'll first discuss as mothers, when they are the primary caregivers of the infant, there were higher levels of amygdala activation than there was in secondary caregiving fathers, which one would assume to be accurate. Additionally, secondary caregiving fathers showed higher levels of STS activation, which was correlated to levels of oxytocin and also father-infant synchrony. Now, moving on, primary caregiving biological fathers and homosexual fathers both displayed amygdala activation identical to primary caregiving mothers. So when we have a biological father and a homosexual father who are primary caregivers, they actually display the same type of neural activation as a primary caregiving mother. And what was found to be even more exciting in this research was that when homosexual fathers were primary caregivers, they also had increased amygdala activation and greater STS activation compared to secondary caregiving fathers. And here, I know it's a lot to look at, but this right here shows different areas of activation, different levels and measures of activation, which if you get a chance, it'd be really nice to go over. So in conclusion, to quote Abram and Fieldman, direct child care experiences shape the parental brain and increase functional integration of social networks, which we have seen in the examples that we get in the parental caregiving network. We see this in social processing networks, and we also see this in the Global Human Caregiving Network and Motivational Emotional Limbic Network and the Social Attention Network. So I think by this we can conclude that the special parent-infant relationship is something that doesn't just come natural. It's something that must be desired by a caregiver for biobehavioral synchrony to occur and for the necessary cognitive changes and adaptive behaviors to occur in one when they become a parent. The most interesting thing in all this research is that someone does not have to be a biological parent of an infant to experience neural activation, hormone fluctuations that contribute to neural activation, and develop these strong, compassionate, loving emotions towards this infant who they have chosen to love. And we see this in the research presented by Abram and Fieldman as they found the correlation in same-sex fathers who were taking care of young. And I think going forward, a really good approach to this would be to conduct another study that involved same-sex female parents who've adopted and other couples who are not biological parents that are opposite sex couples who have adopted. And by doing so, we might have a better understanding if these things happen or if these activations in the brain and these hormone increases occur in all populations of individuals. And by doing so, I think that we can actually create stronger relationships between mothers, fathers, and infants, and stronger relationships between future generations of children who once will become parents. And I want to thank you very much for taking the time to watch my video. I look forward to any questions and comments or suggestions that you have.